Welcome to the Wild Strength podcast, where we talk about all things wild and all things strength related. Today, I have on here my good friend Dave Terry. I asked him what his walk up song is before we started versus asking it right here, right now. I asked this just as kind of like a recap, so you, as the listener, can really get an idea of who you are listening to before you ever hear them say anything. Maybe his walk up song relates to you and you're like, yeah, I want to listen to this person. Maybe it doesn't relate and you stop listening, or maybe you listen either way. Who knows? But Dave's walk up song was, I thought I had it pulled up. Oh, here it is. Overtime by Zach Bryan. We're both big Zach Bryan fans and we talk about Zach Bryan a lot. So we're going to hit it off with a little overtime. Just the way it starts.
This is fired up. Just roll, redneck.
Oh, I feel like I have to play the whole song.
Just
We ain't got time for that. Yeah, we just have our little concert right here. All right, we don't have time for the whole song. But if anyone wants to give us free Zach Bryan tickets, we would love you forever. That would be great.
I wouldn't be upset with you. Honestly, that'd be awesome.
That would be great. Okay, as I mentioned, I have my friend on here, Dave Terry. I've known Dave for a few years now. Met him through strength and conditioning field and industry at a conference a few years back. He spent time coaching in a variety of settings. He's coached for, I think, over 10 years now. Correct me if I'm wrong. So he's got some experience under his belt. He still kind of serves in a strength and conditioning coach advisor type role. And then he also is an avid hunter. He's been hunting for all of your life, some of your life, question mark.
Like 5 years. It's a new thing.
Okay, that's what I thought. I still thought relatively new. Okay. So yeah, so we can kind of relate in that we're relatively new to that. And we'll get into talking a little bit about that as well. But Dave, I will let you introduce yourself.
Good night. All right. I'm Dave. I'm from the great state of Michigan. But I've been fortunate enough to be in the field of strength and conditioning and human performance and just working with teams for a little over a decade, which is wild to say because I still feel like I'm like 27. And
Don't we all?
For 5 years. No, it's been awesome. I've had the ability to move a barbell with weight on it has taken me like around the world, which has been amazing that like something so simple could enable opportunities to go to like countries I've never even heard of. I ended up in Montenegro for a week for 3 years. So I go like for like 9 days every year and teach and hang out. And that was part of the sports diplomacy program the State Department has. So almost like a strength diplomat. And then even going to Japan most recently to teach the ways of the barbell. So it's been a wild world, and like the community that we're in is awesome with that because you kind of meet people, you talk to people, and then next thing you know, you're boarding a jet or you're getting in the Jeep and driving somewhere for an amazing experience. And I think that's something that I don't know if any other field has, and we talk about it all the time. Like this field is so very unique in that like it just opens doors. You meet interesting people, you have interesting experiences. And if you're willing to lean into all that and what that has to offer, like you can have a wildly strong life.
Yes. A wildly strong life. Shameless plug there. Yeah, I think, and that's kind of, as I mentioned before we started recording, like a big reason I wanted to have you on here is we have so many conversations about strength and conditioning per se, but like how it's brought us so many experiences and how it has awarded us so many opportunities to meet people, to go places, and we'll kind of get into here in a little bit this whole concept of like a fireside chat with coaches that Dave has brought up and wants to do at a big conference, and just ultimately that's just getting vulnerable with other coaches, which is something that coaches struggle with a lot. And we can maybe talk a little bit about that as well. But I kind of want to start like, so you've been in it for a little over a decade now. Time flies and it's crazy. What got you into coaching originally? And then kind of walk us through how it's changed for you a little bit and then kind of what it means to you now. A loaded question.
So the door that got me in, like everyone in the Midwest, I played high school football. You know, I feel like that's everywhere, maybe. And I had really, I'd say two coaches that really stood out to me in the way they went about things, and um, one of which was my JV football coach, and he really inspired me to in the way that like I care he cared. And that's the one thing we knew. He cared and he would like we would do anything for him. And that
Mm-hmm.
was just very interesting to see how the mentorship came along and like the life lessons because it was more than just, you know, the football game to him. Like I showed up late to class because I was walking the girl I was dating in high school to class and showed up late. And he like smacked the hell out of me as soon as I walked in. And but he just wanted to teach me a lesson. Like you still got to show up, you know, on time and honor your commitments. And there was a lot more to that. But the impact that coaches had on me during my like I guess formative years really inspired me. And then so when I graduated high school, I actually got invited to come back and coach on the high school staff that I just graduated from. And so I just immediately fell in love with what coaching was. And at that point, it was just fun. Like I really didn't. There was no depth to it yet. You know, it was still just I was just having fun, and I enjoyed just trying to be there really and just be present with folks that needed people to be present with
Mm-hmm.
them. Really just I had fun with it. And then um, during that time I was actually studying. I went to my first 2 years was on a partial woodworking scholarship. So I was actually
Oh,
studying
I didn't know
for like management. I was going to go into construction, and then the economy tanked. And I was like, well, let's see what else is out there. And then we ended up going to Grand Valley State, and I just stopped coaching altogether and just got into strength sports. I was actually not strength sports. I was a competitive bodybuilder.
yeah, you were.
Unfortunately.
Yeah,
Uh,
you were.
so, but and then I remember my training partner came home from like internship day. He was a year ahead of me, and he was like, "Bro, we can just go in the weight room and teach people how to lift weights, and that's like a real job. They'll pay you American dollars for." And I was like, "What? I'm in. Let's do it."
What? Sign me
And
up.
yeah, so then I just showed up in the weight room that day in Grand Haven High School, and we just kind of started that. And I was like, "This is what I want to do." Why I don't know. I didn't really have my why yet. I just your gut knows, so you follow it. And it wasn't until I got to Georgetown when I really truly understood what it meant to be a strength coach. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized I vividly remember this email. And Carl Johnson was a USA weightlifting champion that year in the like at nationals and everything. So I was like, I'm going to learn weightlifting from this guy. And I emailed him, you know, back and forth. Finally got the internship, and he emailed me back. He goes, "Get as strong as you humanly can, so you crush the hands of everyone you meet." And I was like, "This is going to be the best summer of my life, or the worst." Um,
Yes.
and the family that then came out of what the Iron Hoyas is, or was, and still very much is, like they are my brothers. Like um, strength and conditioning, especially the collegiate level, and like there you weren't paid. Like it was like
Don't
they
we
paid me in
know?
Subway gift cards my second summer, so I had something to eat and like just the family that came there, and then that started to give me a little bit more of my why of why I'm a coach, but not only why I'm a strength coach, and then eventually became why I want to mentor other coaches because of what Carl Johnson, Mike Hill, and Chris Tolzman did to me at Georgetown was very much handing down knowledge because you can learn a ton from the books, but there's a lot that's unwritten that you can only really learn with weight on your back and weight in your hands. And
Absolutely.
like falling in love with that process then gave,
Mhm.
you know, a little bit more. Why am I here? Well, I'm here because I'm starting to see how these lessons I'm learning, training with Carl and Chris, who were like insane weightlifters, um, the process. I'm starting to get a little stronger. My clean doesn't look like absolute garbage anymore. I mean, it does now, but like it didn't then. Um,
Yeah.
and and just seeing the processes and growth happen, and then being like, well, if I can have successes here in the weight room, what does that look like on the outside? And I remember coming back. We were at, I think like a Christmas party or something. I was riding with Carl, and Carl was like my big brother mentor. And he's like, "So are you going to go get your master's? Because Georgetown will pay for you to get your master's now." I was like, "No, like I'm not like I'm not an academic. You know, I'm a weight room guy, right? Like just a weight room guy. I don't want to go back to school. Like I'll just fail out, right?" And he turned
Mm-hmm.
around and he yelled at me. And he's like, "You're telling me you don't know what hard work is? Like, I've seen you in the weight room. You just got to do that with books. It's not that hard. Like, you're going to let these kids outwork you,
Yeah.
like you're saying." And I'm just like, oh, I can take these lessons and literally apply them in every area of my life and start to realize like the benefit of process and start to see how that translates into every other area. So then finally, I get to the point where I'm the director at Georgetown now, and I've got the opportunity to mentor coaches again. And so the first thing we did, day one, you walk through the door. Why are you here? Like, because it's so important to me, like to understand not only why I'm here this summer for this internship, like I'm here to make sure that you guys have everything that you need. I'm here to make sure you understand what coaching actually is, not just that like,
Mm-hmm.
cool, you read super training. That's great.
Yeah.
Um,
You
and
read
then
the
really,
essentials. Great.
yeah, understand why they're there, you know?
Yeah.
And I started that conversation off, and this will probably go into something we'll talk about later. Um, but that conversation always start off is this is the best job in the world, but it absolutely ruined my life. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and they'd look at me like,
Mm-hmm.
what? This is so much fun. I'm like, yeah, I love it here. But like my why then changed so aggressively because I realized there was a life outside of coaching. And my coaching
Mm-hmm.
why was simply because like these lessons that we can learn in the weight room are so powerful and can be pushed out into every other area, whether it be like, school, work, personal development, like relationships, even like they can all
Yeah.
be learned, and um, that like that sort of thing they realize after about a year, like, oh, there's a lot of sacrifices you make to be here. And because we love our athletes, and that's the one thing, like we had a staff code when I was there, and like the number one thing was like always lead with love. And it sounds cheesy as hell, but a lot of times that just looked like
Yeah.
honesty, like being honest with
Exactly.
someone when they
To
walk
show
through the
you
door.
care. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, yeah, the showing you care, because you have these athletes for an hour, and you can make their day better, you can make their day worse, you can make their life
Absolutely.
better, you can make their life worse. um, and so I felt like a lot of times we would take those hours for granted, because you're tired, but then like just have it, like it was like have a cup of coffee and wake up. But then at the end of the day, you try to make those days better for the athletes and the staff, and then you'd go home and what did you actually have to offer?
Mm.
And that was kind of with that last staff that was together at Georgetown. We were very, very close and still are very, very close. I realized that like I had missed too much outside my life, weddings, funerals, just showing up for friends.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of hit me like a ton of bricks very fast that year, because we had a very real staff and we would talk about those things. And I think that's something like my new why when it comes to coaching is show coaches that like, yes, we are here for these 8, 10, 12, 13 hours, but we also have to be here for 24 hours, even like you have to be present in your life. And yeah, you have
Yeah.
to sleep for 8, but that's you being present with what you have to do to be ready. And I think that's kind of where I'm going as far as like my why in mentoring and coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is kind of asking people like, hey, what did you do to make you happy today? Like David Peterson and I, he's over at Virginia High Performance, text each
Yeah.
other like probably once or twice a week in the mornings, while we're drinking coffee, like, hey man, what are you most looking for today? What are you grateful for today? And just, it keeps me in check because I'll hear from him and I'm like, oh shoot, like, yeah, that's right. We should do that.
Couple of
And
good
so I think
dudes.
that's my why. What's that?
As a couple of good dudes.
The good news, just doing good things, right?
Yeah, good dudes just doing good things. Yeah, I think lots of good things to kind of take away from what you just said. And I'll start first with whoever's listening to this. If you can't, Dave is a good human and he cares a lot about people. And we'll get into this as well after I kind of mention a couple other things. I think that us as coaches, and I think any good coach, mentor, leader, I'll even say leader, right? Any good leader, even like you don't have to be in this field, it could be in business or whatever. Any good leader does want to pour into people. They genuinely want people to be better. They want to help people. They want to mentor people, but it's almost always at the cost of themselves. It's at the cost of their own free time. It's at the cost of their own mental health sometimes. And we can get into that too. But you said, I really like how you said that there's so much that can be learned and taken away from just being in the weight room, right? Like the weight room is not just going to sweat. It's not just going to get stronger. It's not just going to look your best. And it's okay if those are why you go. But when you show up and do something hard day in and day out, that starts to play into all other aspects of your life. And I think athletes start to realize that, just general gym goers start to realize that it does play out in all these other aspects of your life. And then, like you had mentioned, you always ask whoever you're working with, what is your why, or why are you here? And when you have a good person in your life who cares enough to ask those questions, that kind of changes how you think about your day, how you think about what's going on in your life. Because yeah, you have someone who shows up that is under your guidance, and when they can see, there's a quote that I'm trying to think of that's not coming to my mind, but like something along the lines of like showing that you care. um oh my god, now it's gonna bother me that it's not coming to my mind. Anyways, when you just show up and you show that you care and people see that, they're gonna want to do things for you and with you, and they're gonna want to be on your team at the end of the day. But yeah, I kind of want to go back on the concept of, like I said, as people can tell, Dave cares about people. I think we relate in that way very much, and why we're really good friends. But we both also, getting vulnerable here, struggle with caring about people so much and wanting to help people so much that sometimes it is at the cost of ourselves. Um, Dave, what do you, and I know that's like we've kind of had conversations about this outside of this, but like talk about some things that you've done to not even just like help yourself, but like help build a community to kind of, I wouldn't say fix those things, but at least like bring awareness to it. Because I know that like you've got, like you were just talking about David, a good group of dudes who, like, you guys get vulnerable with each other. You ask the hard questions, you talk about the hard things, and you started doing that because you realized how good that was for you guys.
Mhm. It actually started when I was at Georgetown. Hill, the director at the time,
Mhm.
like put me in touch with someone. And it was like, here's a work-life balance mentor, Dave. And the first phone call we had, he's like, all right, you're familiar with 531? I'm like, yeah, I'm familiar with 531.
Aren't we all?
Like, all right, name 5 things you do outside of work. All right,
Oof.
cool. Name 5 things. He goes, no, I said outside of work. He's like, you watch weightlifting. That's work. That's your job. You know, you sit there and like you read about weightlifting. That's your job. And I had one thing I did outside of work. And then he's like, all right, name 3 attributes that you would like to be remembered as. And I was like, all right. And then he kind of went through and like the one person is who you're ultimately becoming. And I was like, I only do one thing out of work. Like I thought I was just like, healthy, balanced individual, but like work and life should never be a work-life balance. Like that should never be
Yeah,
something that is equal, right?
absolutely.
Um, and like I'm all for working hard and hard work, but I'm also for like getting the most out of life because we got one spin. Um,
One
and
spin, yeah.
so yeah, one spin. And so it turned a lot like at Georgetown, I started thinking about that and like figuring it out. And I was fortunate enough to have, again, mentors that cared about me and poured into me and taught me a lot of different skills. And then in 2018, my training partner at the time, we trained together the whole time we were at Georgetown. Um, Sean was like, you ever been hunting? I was like, no. He's like, all right, let's go hunting. Like, let's go out in the woods. We'll go. And I think I took heavily armed naps, basically, is what I was doing. And I fell in love with it, just like sitting in the woods, hanging out. And
Heavily
so that
armored
was,
naps.
oh, cool. Like that's something outside of the weight room that I can do. And then like, oh, there's a new process to learn here because now I'm harvesting meat and I'm processing it myself. And like, I'm starting to see this and appreciate meat because like this steak that I have in front of me right now, well, I saw it when it was alive. And so it's a new respect for like meat and like where that
Mhm.
comes from and learning the process of that and like how I'm going to utilize these different things to fuel my body, right? But so that
Mhm.
was a cool process to learn outside of work. And it's like, okay, so I've got one that I do for 6 days a year. So what do I do, daily? And then just kind of kept doing that. And then I really kind of stopped looking outside. I was like, oh, I got like friends. I go to food. I go eat. That's life. And then
Strength coach eats.
Yeah, I had a food
Shout out to Strength Coach Eats.
my interns and I had like a food Instagram there for a bit, and then like in 2019, my dad got real sick,
Mm.
and it changed my perspective on work. you know, so I fortunately like Georgetown was a great place. I got to go home, and I was home for almost like little over a month and a half, like spread out through that fall, helping out, taking care of stuff, and stepping away from the weight room. I realized that there was more to life, right? Like there's more to this. Like I'm needed elsewhere. Like I need to show up in other areas. It's not like that's not the only thing that matters. And being strength coaches, we get so like single minded and focused and very like
Yeah,
linear, if you will. Um,
absolutely.
and so then like I had that great staff there, Andy, Trevor, Nate, Parker, like Tommy, like all the boys, Leva, like all of those boys, like we're like brothers. And they were very supportive of that, of me like, dude, you need to go out and do some stuff. And so during COVID, the world shut down, right? So I had an opportunity to have this life outside of work. So I started cooking a lot more, falling in love with that process a little bit more rather than just going out to eat. And then what ended up sticking was baking focaccia bread. Like I'm
Yes.
probably going to bake some this weekend. Um, I make a ton of venison jerky on my
Hmm.
smoker. I love that process of like messing around and then like with different flavors and stuff. Um, and then yeah, hunting, reading, and like finding things to really like fill in myself with that. And it's really just making sure I'm doing those things to fill up. And then like most recently, I think was fishing, like because I can do that. I can just bop out for like 5 minutes, go fish real
Yeah.
quick, come back. Really, all I'm doing there is doing like breath work, sitting next to a river. I'm not doing much
Catching
catching.
stick fish.
Yeah, catching a lot of big sticks and then seeing a lot of big bass jump and not bite on anything I'm putting out there. But like that time for me is very rejuvenating. Just being able to sit and
Yeah.
breathe and like I don't have to answer my phone. I don't have to do anything. I can just hang out. And that's helped a lot of just like sitting and thinking and processing because I think
Mm.
as coaches, we hit the gas a lot because we're showing up for people. We're showing up, but then like take a step back and like, what did I learn from today? How can I get better? Because if all we do is pour out and we don't like pause or even like input, you're
Hmm.
left fairly empty. And like I think we've all been there
Yeah.
multiple times before we realize
Yeah.
like I should probably fill back up. And like I need to fill back up on water. I haven't drank anything today.
It's like I'm
Um,
thirsty.
yeah, so I feel like for a podcast, I was like, oh, I'll drink water and look healthy. Um, but yeah, like filling up. So I've had to find those things, and it's been an adventure and the importance of them. Hopefully there's a lot of life that can get in the way, or sorry, there's a lot of work that can get in the way of life a lot of the times, and it's time, just setting boundaries with yourself because it's easy to set boundaries like and not follow them, but being like honest, like, hey, I'm going to leave work by 3 o'clock if I have nothing to do, and I'm going to go home and I'm actually going to be present in my life rather than go just fall asleep on the couch. I'm going to go fish real quick, or I'm going to go run to the store and like cook something rad for dinner tonight, and just do something to benefit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like that you brought up getting into hunting and the outdoors and how that's helped you as well. And you can probably attest to this as much as I can. Like, I had something similar happen. Like something happened to my life, and it was like you kind of have to readjust the way you think things, readjust the way you approach things, readjust the way you approach life. And you realize like life is fucking short at the end of the day. So I just got to a point where, and it, for anyone who's unfamiliar with coaching, like most coaches pride themselves in working 60, 70 hour weeks. And that's what we hang our hat on at the end of the day because that's how we make as little money as we make sometimes, unfortunately. But we pride ourselves in putting in the hard work and what you said, showing up for other people and helping people and caring for people. And then it's unfortunate that I think oftentimes it does take something like that to happen, and not even just a coach's life, but like anyone's life, to really recognize, I've got to take a step back. And I got to a point where I was like, I've spent all of my 20s working my life away. And like, what have I done outside of work and school to really make myself happy? And same thing, it was getting into, I was living in Colorado at the time that all this had kind of went down. And I was, COVID happened, the world shut down, and I had nothing to do but go to the mountains. And thank God I had somewhere like that to go, because who knows where my life would, like where my head would have spiraled to. Like I was able to get outside and be in the mountains and like remove myself from things sometimes, and then really reflect and realize like I do have to fill my cup up. And once I learned how to do that and I kind of got back into like real life started happening again and you're able to be back in person again, I felt so much better at my job. And nothing changed other than I was able to do things to help myself. I wasn't only just helping other people. I still was, right? But I felt like I was able to do that so much better because I was helping myself. And yeah, you had mentioned like outdoors and hunting and all of that. Do you Were you more into kind of like outdoors and stuff first? I don't even know that we've ever talked about this before. Before you got into hunting, was it kind of like everything happened at once? Like, did you grow up being outside camping, any of that as a kid, or you really didn't do any of that till recently?
So growing up, there was this like big creek wooded area
Okay.
right across the street. So my buddies and I, after school, we just go run through the woods. We'd run down the creek. We would just like, we'd light little islands on fire and have fires and just like hang out in the woods until we heard
Yeah.
like the dad's whistle for us. And we'd all come running out.
Yeah.
So like
Uh,
I grew up basically doing that. And then when I started working, I was in a weight room all the time. So it was like, it's just nice to see like organic, like trees, water. Like it's just very relaxing. And like ever since I was like 5, A River Runs Through It has been my favorite movie in the world.
yeah, we've talked about this.
And like, so like anything that like takes me to that mindset of just like, hey, like it's life, right? I feel like that's the outdoors, just kind of refreshing. You know, it's like just it's relaxing. I don't know any other way. I like there's probably plenty of depth we can pull from it. But basically like being outside and just relaxing is it like it's a wellness practice. Everyone has to find their like wellness practice because like life is a sine wave. And I went through this course 2 years ago, or yeah, 2 years ago, and they said like the floor of your sine wave is maintained by your wellness practices. So if you don't do them, you have no floor, and like your
Mm,
lows are might be
mhm.
lower, and then like your mentors are your highs, making sure you don't go too high, right? Like so that riding that sine wave of life, you have your wellness practices. So like getting outside and just like going for a walk, like that's one I have if I'm not going to go fishing or like don't have a whole weekend to go hunting, and like I think that's important. You know, finding little ways to like daily. I think Dan, like we're talking strength coach Dan John, like he said in presentation, he just find out what's important and do it every day. So like
Mhm.
if taking care of yourself is important, you're gonna find those little things to do every day because we all, if we could, we would all go do these like I would love to go to Nairobi, you know, and go to a safari with my girl or something like that would be rad.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like what can I do daily to make sure that I'm taking care of myself and having like an adventure? Because I think life is supposed to be an adventure, and like I try to make most of my big decisions on like what would be a cool next chapter in this one. Um,
Yeah, for
and
sure.
actually, on that note, most of my life decisions are what would be a cool next chapter, and like if I had to sit down and look face to face with 14-year-old me, would I like jump me for that decision, or would I be like,
Mhm.
hell yeah, brother, good job?
Oh yeah, brother.
Um, that's probably how I spoke when I was 14, maybe. Um,
I bet. Yeah.
but I think, yeah, just finding something to do daily. And I think that's where it's easy to get outside, wherever you're at, it's easy to walk outside and all that sort of stuff. And that's just rejuvenating.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that kind of the reflection part and kind of asking yourself, A, what do I want my next chapter to look like? That's kind of looking forward a little bit. And I know one thing that I struggle with a lot is I used to put so much emphasis on what does the future look like, and like so much so that I didn't live in the now, and to a point where like if my life pivoted outside of what I thought my plan or my path was, it caused me so much stress and anxiety. And then I kind of, yeah, have to learn. I have to live in the moment, and I can have an idea, like you said, what do I want the next chapter to look like? I can have a broad idea of what I want it to look like and things that I would want to happen, but I also have to understand that life happens and we pivot and things that are unexpected are going to happen. And I can't be stressed because of that. I have to take it and I have to roll with it. But I also like the concept of, yeah, what would my 14-year-old self like? Would he like, would 14-year-old Dave want to do this? Yeah, 14-year-old Dave would be fucking stoked. We're
Yeah.
gonna do it. And that's kind of, yeah, looking forward and looking back. And I think that's really healthy. Um, Sometimes looking back can be really hard depending on like what prior experiences have been. But I think looking at it from, like you said, your ultimately your inner child, which if that's actually a thing in psychology, is like inner child work and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if that's exactly what you were referencing there. But that is a real thing for anyone who's like unfamiliar with it, like kind of going back to your inner child and like checking in with them and like, would they either be happy with what you're doing? Like, but is it, are you in a good place? Would they be, is just anything like where you thought that you would even be? And that's always like a really cool way to reflect on those kinds of things. I kind of want to get into like the community aspect of it as well. We've both talked about this in depth, like a million times probably, both in strength and conditioning and in the outdoors and in hunting. I think each of them really has their own community or tribe, for lack of a better word, whatever you want to call it. But then you put all of those together, and it's even a like smaller community of some of the
Weird.
coolest people I've ever met. And like, really, my reason in starting this podcast is just I've met, and the people that I have on here, like some of them will have nothing to do with training and human performance. Some of them will have nothing to do with hunting in the outdoors. Some of them will have nothing to do with either. But to be able to bring a group of people who at least have an interest in it or something like that together to talk about them and to have these kinds of conversations is, yeah, that was my interest in starting the podcast. But what has that community been for you? What has it been to you? And yeah, how has that kind of helped you grow as well?
Oh, so that staff that I had last at Georgetown, we all like just kind of looked out for each other, right? And we kind of have hard conversations. And I think there's something very important for men to have hard conversations with other men. That's what
Mm-hmm.
something I firmly believe in. And same thing, like I think I'm just speaking from my personal experience. I think that's been very crucial is to have honest conversations with other men that like are there to make you better. And a lot of times, like what that looked like for me is talking about something and then being held accountable for decisions is the other part is being able to talk and then being held accountable. So that's one thing. Like my like white picket fence of people, everyone that's on the inside of that, there's a level of accountability because there's a standard that my dudes know that I want to hold myself to, and if I step outside of that, they're like, "Hey, Dave, you have 24 hours, and I expect you to be like figuring out how to get back."
Mm-hmm.
So like I've gotten knocked down a few times, and they're like, "That's cool. Like you'll deal with it, and like we're here for you, but like you still have a standard of who you're trying to be." And that's been very crucial in me developing into the man I am today and the man I want to be is that community. Like we've got like bros out there that I can call up and they'll sit and talk to me while I'm sitting there like not doing well. And then it's the same thing too. Like I'm sitting there listening, like, all right, dude, like let's do this. And we've had like 3 hour long conversations, with and that's I feel like that's rare for men to at least have. So that community of just accountability and truth to speak into each other and like kind of love up on dude, like love up on your bros. And I think that's crucial in a lot of the positions that we're in because we're, working hard and just doing our thing and trying to be better folks. And then in general, like with our community that we're in, this weird place that we call our like tribe, like I don't know everyone, but like I know you when I see you because we're all at the
Yeah.
same freaking events. Um,
Yeah.
like I'm wearing this Winter Strong shirt. Like you show up in that field at Winter Strong, and like David Peterson, he's gonna kill me. I said his last name wrong. David Pedersen. And I showed up and like went to the tree line. He hung his hammock. I sit on my tent. And we looked around. We're like, I don't know any of these people, but they feel like they're ours. Like
Did we
they're
just
our.
become best friends?
Yeah. And so you just like walk around, and we ended up being like under the tent because Connor Page from Sornex is a good buddy of mine too. Was there, and then we ended up hanging out with him, and then meeting a bunch of people. And like, next thing you know, you're sitting there with like, I remember hanging out with Zach Evanesh, and like I've looked up to that dude since I was like 19, and then like we're boys, and it's just
Yeah.
this weird community of like meatheads, and then like avid hunters, and then just like good people that have all like converged into this, and like yeah, they show up at Winter Strong, but they show up at TSAC, and it's just like most of it shows up on Instagram, and it's these people that have like encourage you to go live these experiences that like maybe you're like on the fence about, or maybe you have like an ounce of fear, you know, and it's just encouraging to kind of be like, oh no, we're going to go do this. I'm going to do it with you. Um, and that's like, I impulsively there, like I staged the bow for this, you know, the podcast. I impulsively bought that at Winter Strong just because like Connor's like, let's go bow hunting sometime. And then David was like, yeah, Dave, I'll take you out. We'll go hunting out west, bow hunting. I'm like, let's go. And then I haven't shot it since. Cause I
Like, but these are good dudes that I want to go bow hunting with, so I'm gonna get a bow.
exactly, I just wanted to fit in. And I like shooting the bow for 2 days with Connor. I was like, this is this is a process I'm curious about. This is very like soothing on my mind for some reason. And
Mm-hmm.
I think just being around good people that challenge you to do new things,
Mm-hmm.
to do like things that are good for you, and then to
Mm-hmm.
remind you that, hey, this is not why we like don't do this. This is why we don't do this. Do you remember? Like, oh yeah, dude, I learned that. And I know like you and I've had hours of conversation about like anything under the sun. And that's the other thing I love about this community is the ability to talk with majority of anybody about
Mm-hmm.
real stuff.
Yeah,
That's something
absolutely.
that I'm very guilty of, and up until recently, I've been wildly uncomfortable with. Is talking about
And now
certain,
you're on a podcast talking about
yeah,
it.
talking about certain specific things, and I finally started talking about it, and it's been like hard. Um, and I think being in this community, it definitely feels better because you're around individuals that are also doing it, and that's where I realized of like I was talking to someone within the community, and they're like, Dave, you need to talk to like you need to talk about this because you're obviously unwell. I'm like, yeah, I'm sitting on this
Yeah.
log. I threw 2 lures into the trees and I gave up fishing for today. I'm not doing well with this and I don't want to talk about it. And they're like, do you feel better? I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to. Like, I don't want to talk about this. And that's the other part of the community. So I think that's a
Mhm.
long, unorganized answer of great people that hold you accountable,
Yeah.
and that like there's just a mutual unspoken understanding. And I think a lot of it has to do with either a you've like physically done something hard with that person and you're like, oh, we understand each other, or you know like who that like you just there's a mutual understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think going through, I've given a presentation on this a little bit and actually recently kind of wrote about it in a blog as well. The social aspect, the community aspect of just like physical fitness and exercise in general. If you go and do something hard with other people, you're going to feel good about yourself for doing it, and then you're going to feel this sense of community, and they're going to bring more to you as well. If you go outdoors with other people, like just having those people in your life that you can talk to, that you can do things with, is huge. And I think, at least from my perspective, more and more people, especially in this age of social media, are becoming more and more isolated. And it's easy to stay at home, and it's easy to just talk to people through Instagram. It's easy to just talk to people through text message and all that stuff. And granted, like I have friends, including you, all over the country, and sometimes that's the only way that you can communicate. But we'll pick up the phone and call each other or FaceTime. We try to see each other whenever we can. But yeah, I think more so in this day than ever, people are becoming isolated and having these odd relationships, we'll call them, and relationships includes like friends and everything, not just romantic partners, through technology. And not as often anymore are people being outside and actually interacting with other people. But I do want to, you had mentioned, and a very true statement, how it is hard for men to have hard conversations with other men. And just from an outsider's perspective as a female, like I recognize that, and I see time and time again how like if you were to be a fly on the wall watching a group of girls hanging out and a group of guys hanging out, the kinds of conversations you would hear are totally different. Like girls want to tell each other everything about their lives, and guys want to shoot the shit. And there's nothing wrong with either of those, right? But there was a podcast I was listening to not long ago called "We Are Man Enough." I highly recommend it to anyone. You don't have to any man or woman. There's a female as a host and then two other men, and it's basically just getting vulnerable as men and what that looks like and how like the role that the women play in that as well. But anyways, the chick that's on it was saying that female friendships are so vulnerable, and we have such deep friendships and such deep relationships that a in terms of like finding a romantic partner, it can be hard because we know what we have in our friendships and we want that in our romantic partners as well. So it's hard sometimes to find maybe a male who can have those kinds of conversations, but also for men, like man to man, it's they don't understand the kind of relationships that we have with our female friends because they are such deep relationships. So like, and not, it doesn't necessarily have to be a question, but yeah, you mentioned that you do appreciate those like vulnerable man to man conversations that you can have. And I hope like a goal for me, and I have so many male friends, and that I always try to tell them it's easy. And I've been told it's easy for men to open up to women because they feel safe in a way, like it's a soft, safe place. But I think more importantly, they should open up to other men because there are more men who can relate to the things that they are going through than are women who can relate to those things. How do you? And I know you said you have good friends in your life who have encouraged you to do that and who help you do that. But when you encounter maybe someone who struggles with that, how have you kind of like encouraged them or helped them to just be more vulnerable, for lack of a better way to put it, and just like have those conversations?
I'm gonna rewind to like the genesis of my realization of like, oh, I need to be vulnerable. So
Yeah.
like I was the football strength coach at Georgetown, and um, Andy Holmes was my like brother there, and things weren't good. One lift, like things weren't good. I didn't know what was going on. It was a Sunday lift, and I was like pretty emotional, like trying to hold it together. Because my dad just got put on the transplant list. Like we found out, like if he didn't get a transplant, he wasn't going to be around next year, type stuff.
Mm,
And
yep.
I got up in front of the team. I was like, "Hey guys, like good lift today, but I need to be honest with you. Like I'm not going to be here probably next week." And then just boom, lost it, and had a hard time. It took me a minute to like get out the next part of that sentence, and that was just me being real. And Andy encouraged me to be real. And after lift that day, three athletes stayed back, and I was like, "Why? Like, what's up, guys?" And they're like, "I need someone to talk to." I was like, "About," and they're like, "I got something going on, and like you obviously do too, and I feel like you relate." And I was like, "What?" And so like we sat back and we had real conversations, and they were going through very similar stuff of parents being very, very sick. And I realized the need for like just strong dudes to be strong dudes and actually like
Mhm.
through and through be strong dudes and be like, these are emotions. Hi, they are uncomfortable and I don't like them, but like they're here and I can like, I know this sounds crazy, but as a man, I feel something other than anger. This is wild. Um, and it's, that was my aha moment. And then like
Mhm.
I had like my close friends that I would talk to about life, but then realizing like maybe like in my mentor like role, I needed to talk about why we need to do that. And then with that is came a lot of just deep conversations within that like picket fence of people of very real stuff. And I think the importance of that is having someone that understands, like deeply understands you, and then also someone that like is going to tell you the truth. Because like if
Mm.
like if a person in a relationship with tells me the truth, there's a chance I might be like, well, I didn't want to hear that from you, and not actually hear what I needed to hear.
Mm.
Where it's like a good brother that you know is going to be with you through thick and thin. Like, and he tells you, hey, like, you're fucked up, or like, hey, like, I love you. Like, you needed to hear that. And, you need to kind of talk about this a little bit more with me because we got like, you just need to get it out. And having guys that'll hold you to that and be there for you is huge because I know like it was very interesting because we all got together. Like 3 or 4 of us were very tight growing up since we were like in like first grade, and then um, he passed away, and we all got together and we were sitting around like a bonfire and just sharing stories. It's one of those nights where like my eyes burnt and my stomach hurt the next day because I was laughing and crying so hard. But being with those dudes that understood a that we lost like a dude that our brother that we grew up with, b we're there for all those memories, and then also understood me laughing at some of this stuff rather than like, whoa, and so just kind of being understood and going through that sort of shared stuff, like having those dudes that are close to you, um, helps go through that. Because like yesterday, I texted that same group I was at the fire. I was like, hey, hope you all are doing well. Some memories popped up on Facebook of high school football from like, 15 years ago, right? And just reminded me of all this stuff. And it's just very much like I need those dudes to go through life, and like having that
Mm.
support that I know I can like fall back on and relax, and they can kind of cover, hell, if I need anything, I know I can call like these 3 dudes and things like I'll have that. And I feel like that's something that intimacy almost in relationships and that like true brotherhood is very rare. And I've been fortunate enough to have like a whole hell of a lot of brothers in that. And then, on the other hand too, like having, a dude be like, hey, I got nowhere to stay. Like, all right, cool. Come live with me for a little bit. And they
Hmm.
come hang out and stay. And like, cool. I got a dude who stays with me for like a couple of weeks. And that's something I did at Georgetown all the time. Like we, it was joked there was a strength coach orphanage because we had people roll through just when things got tough and they just needed a place to crash for a little bit.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
once had like, I want to say we had like 6 coaches staying at this house in a 2-bedroom house. It was great.
Hmm.
Um, but I
Love
think
that.
the importance of community is, I think, especially after COVID, we realized how important it was. And then
Mm.
I just think for guys to be around other strong guys, it's just encouraging is really all it comes down to. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think
No,
that's
I
about
love that. I think not even just the sense of someone, it is great to find someone who you can relate to, who shares similar stories. It kind of makes it a little bit easier to open up in that way. But I think at the end of the day, man or woman, people just want someone who's going to listen. And when you can provide that space for someone to just share their story, like you said, you had a couple athletes who were going through something similar with their parents, like you were with your dad, and that helps tremendously. But I had a couple athletes in the past who I could not relate to what they were going, and this was kind of like a learning experience for me. I couldn't relate to what they were going through in the story that they were telling me. And I kind of felt bad because I wanted to, right? A part of me being just wanting to help was like, God, how can I put myself through that or something similar so that I can relate? But that's not what we have to do as caring people who want to help, or as coaches or leaders or whatever who want to help. I think just providing that, yeah, that safe place at the end of the day for someone to feel comfortable and sharing something that's vulnerable. I've been in situations where I was working with special operations unit, and a guy had come up to me and told me this kind of story about a deployment that had kind of wrecked his world. And at the end of the story, he says, I've never told that to anybody. My wife doesn't even know this. And I kind of looked at him and I was like, first, I'm so glad you were able to say this because I can tell, like, the way he was telling the story, his shoulders were like in his ears, right? And as it's coming out of him, you see, like, literally, I'm not kidding, you see his shoulders just kind of start to like go down. And I said that I'm like, I can tell by the way you're holding your body that you feel better that you just said that. And I hope that, I guess I'm so glad you felt that I gave that space to you. I hope that you continue now to take how you feel after sharing that with me and share that with more people. Share those kinds of things with your family. Share those kinds of things with your buddies in the team room. Share those kinds of things with your family, and just simply getting them out and talking about them, or write them down. Journaling is huge too. If you're not, and this is for like anyone who's listening, and maybe you're on a mental health journey, maybe you're not, maybe you're trying to figure some things out. If you aren't comfortable yet sharing with somebody, write it down, because I think today a lot of the like mental health problems that we have are because we live in our own heads and we live in our own worlds and we don't do anything about it, and we medicate it thinking that's what's going to solve the problem, and then even medications aren't solving the problem. So I think just, yeah, simply getting it out, writing it down, talking to someone, but yeah, being that safe space, and I keep using the phrase safe space for lack of a better one, for someone to just talk to. And I know, and maybe this is me making an assumption, so correct me if I'm wrong. Do you feel, and for if you don't know Dave and you can't tell by watching the video, he's a big burly man, doesn't look like someone who would be soft and sweet when you meet him, but he
What
can
do you
be.
mean?
What do you mean? But he can be. Do you find it hard for athletes or whomever to at least initially be comfortable with you to talk about these kinds of things, or do you feel like you've kind of you've kind of mastered creating that space from the beginning?
I mastered it. I've been great at it ever since I started. Yeah.
Dumb question.
Um, so I'm going to start with another story. So when like so in 2022, I had some stuff happen, and I wasn't talking about it. I just shut down. And
Yeah.
I luckily I had someone that cared about me enough to be like, "Hey, Dave, you're not even handling this. You just put it in a box and put something heavy on it and shoved it down deep." And I was like, "Yes." So she sent myself and a couple buddies to this 2 day place where we thought it was something. And when we got there, they were like, "So what are you struggling with?" And we're like, "Everything's fine." And then, you
Can't
know,
pick up the weights.
yeah, like, "What are you actually struggling with?" I was like, "Oh, like death. Like people are dying on me, and I don't know what to do with it.
Mm,
And they're dying like way too many, way too fast." And
mm-hmm.
so at the end of that 2 days, we had this thing like a labyrinth. So you like walk in just kind of maze. And before you entered the labyrinth, the guy that was running the course said like all these positive affirmations. I didn't remember a lick of what he said. I wasn't listening. Like unless he told me something constructive, I was like, not listening to anything nice anyone had to say. Which I realized like that's probably not great. And then they handed you like a rock.
Mm-hmm.
So you had this like big uncomfortable rock that you had to carry through the labyrinth, and each of us had one.
Okay.
And he said, just go sit it down, and I want this to be like the weight that you have by like what you said you came here to kind of like figure out how to process. This is that weight. I just need you to sit it down in the middle. Got it. Too easy. We all got to the middle. The three of us, who were all very close, like one of them was one of my best buddies. We all looked out, didn't look at each other, and held on to our rocks. They were big, uncomfortable rocks. We just held on to them.
Mm-hmm.
And until one person turned around and put theirs in the middle, and then the other two of us just sat it down, and then we walked out of the labyrinth. And then afterwards I was like, oh, so like until someone puts their rock down, people will sit there and hold on to that weight until they feel comfortable enough once they see someone else put their rock down. And I
Mm.
was like, oh, that's a heavy lesson to learn, like really quickly, because I wasn't comfortable sharing like what I had going on until the leader shared what he had going on. And I was like, all right, yeah, like freaking people are dying on me and I don't know what to do. Um, and then that like sort of sharing like, oh, this is what you have to do to kind of show that vulnerability. And like, you know, sometimes it's athletes, but a lot of times it's like other folks that like are just other coaches that we work with in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of being like, hey, this is what's going on with me. Like, oh shoot. this is what's going on with me, like with whatever, and specifically um, sharing those, like just getting a little bit open about what's going on is opened up doors to really get some great advice. Like trying to figure out trying to figure out dating. And then you're talking to like, here's what's worked, here's what doesn't, here's why I got
Yeah.
divorced, here's why this, like, not that I got divorced, I've never been married, but like listening to buddies that have gone through this and like what to look for, what
Mhm.
not to, how to do this the right way, and just like lessons learned. And then like how to, the biggest thing for me is like, I reached out to a guy I really look up to, and I was like, dude, I don't know what to do right now because like there's just this weight of loss on me and I don't know what to do with it. And he said three things. He goes, number one, talk about it. Like get it out. Like just tell the stories. Like when you feel like you want to talk about it, do it. Don't be afraid because you feel like emotions coming out. Two, when the emotions come out, don't push them back down. And I was like, what? you know and just the way to like
What
kind
do
of
you
process that, I think that's
mean?
something that everyone goes through at some point. And like it's the tough thing to do, to shove it down and not deal with it. And then sometimes you have to do that. You have to put it down, but eventually you have to pick that back up and then look
Mm.
at it. I think that's where kind of the realization of like, yeah, sometimes people aren't ready to talk about it, but then eventually like just making space for that to show up. And that's something that I've been very fortunate, like someone very close to me recently was like, hey Dave, you like haven't spoken in a complete sentence about some stuff that I can tell is bothering you. So like I just want to let you know, like I'm here
Mm.
for whenever that you are ready to talk about that. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, like I definitely want to talk to this, with her. Like I'd love to do that now. And that's all it took, was something as simple as
Mhm.
that. And like that's a lesson learned for me too. Like, hey bro, like I'm here for it whenever. And like which reminds me of the like, oh, the nobody cares, work harder. Like
Ugh.
it's all over wins and stuff. It's like, oh, no one cares. Like, well, I fucking care. Like, care a lot. Like, work harder though too. Like, you probably should
Yeah.
work a little harder.
I
But like,
care, but work harder.
yeah, like you probably work a little harder because I care, and then like
Yeah.
do that. So I think a lot of those, and again, coming back to lessons learned in the gym, is like leaning into the reality of what that is, and the weight room tells you a lot of truth and exposes you to like what truth actually is. And I think a lot of times is we can live in like half truths, like, oh, like I'm fine, like everything, this doesn't bother me. Well, it's just making me a little anxious. It's like, well, what's the truth of this? Why are you anxious? And like
Mhm.
that's a lesson I learned. Like when you unrack 600 pounds, it's still 600 pounds. And like my self talk when I unrack heavy weights is, this is heavy, but you also train for this to lift heavy weights. That's the goal. So it's like that's something I've taken into a lot of these things. Like, yes, this is a heavy thing going on right now, but like that's part of this life that you want to live and get the most out of it and the depth out of it. So
Mhm.
like, yeah, this is what you're here for. It's not necessarily bad. It's just uncomfortable and really
Mm.
sad maybe, but like you want to get the most out of it. And then so like those lessons I'm learning, like, okay, I remember, TSAC 22. I
Mhm.
remember being so sad when it was over because like we all got so close because we were like just in the middle of
Yeah.
San Antonio,
Best
like,
conference ever.
yeah, and like we were just like, this was the best summer camp. But why? Well, we all had like really randomly weird, deep talks. We all bonded over like training hard and having fun, and like
Mhm.
it wasn't heavy, but it was like deep. And I think that's the other thing too that gets confused a lot of times is like just because it's deep, people are like, oh, it has to be a heavy talk. Like, no,
Mm.
I like light, deep talks too. Like those are just as connecting. And I think as people, we want to be very connected to one another.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that like the opening of those conversations, sharing stories, reveal like understanding what truth is. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, but like that's a lesson we can pull out of the weight room and pull into hunting, relationships, like truth, living in truth. What does that look like for me? Well, like reminding myself to tell myself the truth of the situation is like
Mhm.
talking about like a lot of times like, hey, I'm going to plan this. Like, what's the truth? I have no control of my future. That's the truth. And like, there's a lot of
Absolutely.
freedom in that and a lot of peace that you can have by just really being honest with yourself of
Mm.
like, I get that. Like today, I didn't want to train at all. I didn't
Me
want to
neither.
deadlift. That's why I'm fidgeting because my
Me
back's a
neither.
little tight. But I was like, I'll just do this. And then you do a little bit and you're like, all right, fine, I'll do the rest of it.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing in life, right? Like, I don't want to do this. All right, I'll do a little. All right, like, that's right. I love this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as you just kind of get the ball rolling sometimes, right? And just sometimes it's hard to start and everyone can relate to that, but once you start, it's kind of motivating what you start. And I touch back on kind of what you said, the story that you were telling as far as like putting the rocks down and you're like, "Oh, we can put this weight down." But I felt like I had to be strong and carry all this weight just like everybody else and I felt like I couldn't put this weight down and unfortunately that's kind of what society tells us. Maybe not society, I guess, but there are big names that people want to follow. David Goggins, that preach that like stay hard, stay heavy, like you can't be vulnerable, you can't be soft, you have to work your ass off all the time. And sometimes that's a good mindset to have. I'm not knocking it by any means, and I like to do hard things. I like to do stuff that I am like, man, this is gonna suck so bad, and I'm only doing it because I hate myself. Like it happens sometimes. We all do it.
Mm-hmm.
But to live that as a lifestyle, to have that be your mindset day in and day out, and think that you can't set these heavy rocks down and you can't share these things with people is, yeah, once again, what leads to, I think, so many mental health issues, relationship problems, friendship issues, all that. Miscommunication ultimately is what these things are,
Never had that.
because people oh, no, never happened to me. Yeah, miscommunication is what it is at the end of the day because people aren't communicating truly what they're feeling and because they don't know how to. Right, like you said, you were like, "Oh, I'm feeling something other than anger." Like, and for the longest time too, I didn't have words for emotions that I felt, right? Like going to therapy and talking to a therapist and learning words for she would the ultimate therapist question at any point in any session is like, so how do you feel about that? It's like, I have feelings about it. I don't know how to tell you. Like, I don't know how to put into words because I don't have words for the emotions and the feelings that I'm feeling. And I think, yeah, putting words to it and talking it out with other people can be really big. But yeah, this has been great. We're coming up on an hour here, and I think with the question that I ask everyone at the end of this, you've probably even answered it throughout this recording so far. But I'll bring it to you anyways. What does wild strength mean to you? You can touch back maybe on some things that you've already mentioned if you want to. You can take it a totally different direction.
Yeah. No, I think it really comes like wild strength in general. Like strength, I'll start with that one, is the like really just being honest with yourself, like the truth. I think there's a lot of truth in strength. And
Mm-hmm.
because at the Henry Rollins talks about like, it doesn't, I don't care if you're like, I don't remember. I'm going to butcher the quote. Basically, I don't care if you're the poorest person on the earth or the richest, you're a king or you're like, a peasant. The 200 pounds is 200 pounds at the end of the day. Like when you go into the weight room, it's the truth. And I think
Mm-hmm.
there's like, when I hear like strength, it's synonymous with like truth and being honest
Mm-hmm.
with yourself. And a lot of that of like throwing weight on the bar. And it's like, can I do this or not? Can I do this or not? Well, let's find out. And the whole point of it is to improve, to add, and
Mm-hmm.
like as life we're looking to add to, right? So that's like strength in general. And then when you throw the wild aspect on it, I think that is the reality of things, of
Mm-hmm.
it being uncontrolled, untamed, and kind of unexplored. Because at the end of the day, like we can have an idea of what the future is going to look like, but if you told me like that this would be our future 4 years ago, I would have thought you were crazy. um, so I think like the wild strength is just very much, it's a path we're all on, and like yeah, it's a barbell and it's the woods, that we all love, but it's the depth of what the lessons that we can pull out and transfer into the rest of our life from the barbell, from you know stalking whitetail, not stalking, but like waiting around for whitetail. Like what can I pull from all this? And I think a lot of that wild strength is literally just like reminding myself to like, there's untamed, unexplored areas that you need to find out there and have fun, both like internally and externally. And like the strength you want to train to make sure that you have the ability to like go do whatever you want. both like physically, health, physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally. Like
Mm.
it's all training at the end of the day. Like I was reading somewhere, like even like the best relationships are like fit people. You can tell because they work at it. So a lot of that comes down to, chasing that. And I feel like when I hear wild too, I think of pursuit. So like the wild pursuit of strength. So yeah, basically
God,
just like wild truth.
yeah. I love this question, and it's my favorite. And the answers that I get from people make me emotional sometimes because, and in a good way. Um, because it's kind of a spin like last minute before I like sat down to record my very first episode, like guest episode. I was like, I'm just gonna throw this in there and see how it goes and see if it hits. And it has made me have such an appreciation for the name. Like the name obviously was because I like being outdoors and strength and conditioning is a passion of mine. But because I've taken it beyond that with this question and the kind of answers that I get, just like fires me up, Dave. It fires me up. People have such great answers to it, and I didn't know like how people were gonna answer it because you could 100% have said wild strength to me is hitting a new PR in the weight room, which is cool too. Like that's
It is.
okay. Yeah, that's absolutely wild strength. But not no one yet has been very surface level with it, and it fills my cup. It makes me happy.
Doesn't
Dave, I know you're not super active on social media or anything like that, but
That's whole
if you want
influencer.
to, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you? If you have a bro who wants to have a bro talk with you, where can they find you?
Uh, I drink coffee over at Weird Brothers Coffee down the street, so you can just find me
Where are you
there on the
located?
weekend in Virginia.
Okay.
No, this is
Go
so
have
cheap.
coffee with Dave. Go to Virginia,
Yeah,
have
yeah,
coffee with
just
Dave.
come
It's
have a
worth
cup of
it.
coffee with me, or just come over. We'll sit on the deck. I started roasting my own coffee. That's something I've been doing to take care of myself.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
he has been.
got a ton of new Peaberry and Yirgacheffian, so maybe no. Dave Terry 16 on Instagram. Just sliding those DMs, man. Or
Slide in
yeah,
his DMs, hit him up. Great guy, and yeah, you've heard him talk about this entire time, like having those vulnerable conversations, and I've heard him tell stories of ones he's had with really good friends. So if you're in a place where you're looking for just somebody to chat with, I hope you feel comfortable reaching out to big old burly Dave
call
because
me a
he
brother.
can be soft if you need him to be.